Students, in the last class we discussed the introductory part of manned biosphere up to water. In this class, we have to discuss the remaining part of manned biosphere. That is, one we call it as biotic factors. The second one we call it as food chains. The third one is energy flow, functional aspects of an ecosystem, the population ecology, and the last part biodiversity. Now these are the remaining parts present in the manned biosphere. Now before going to the remaining parts, as usual a small introduction is the next part we discussing is the biotic factors in an ecosystem. The structural components are broadly classified into one we call it as biotic factors and the second one we call it as abiotic factors. In the last class we discussed abiotic factors. One example is physical abiotic factor, one example is light, the second example is temperature, and the third example is water. Now we have to discuss from biotic factors onwards. In an ecosystem, what are the biotic factors? The biotic factors are broadly classified into three categories. One we call it as the producers. The second one we call it as consumers. The third one we call it as decomposers. Now, what are the best examples for the consumers? One example is the green plants. The second example is the phytoplankton. As a producers, their role is significant. That means their role is very important, because the green plants and phytoplankton, they trap the radiant energy and by photosynthesis they prepare their own food material. In addition to the green plants and phytoplankton, chemoautotrophs are also present. The chemotrophs are also producers, but they prepare their own food material by using chemical energy. On producers, what are going to depend the consumers? The consumers are broadly classified into three categories. One we call it as the primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. And the last one we call it as decomposers. Without decomposers, the producers cannot survive for a long period. Again, this one is repeated. In an ecosystem, without decomposers, the producers cannot survive for a long period. This is a small introductory part regarding the biotic factors. Now, while we discussing the questions, regarding each and every question, we have to discuss the surrounding important points. And now we go for the first question. Now, what is the first question? In an ecosystem, the nutrient recycling is largely affected due to the absence of. Now, as we observe in an ecosystem, the first one we call it as the producers, and the second one we call it as the consumers, and the third one we call it as the decomposers. Now, the producers prepare their own food materials. What are the producers? One example we call it as green plants, and the second example we call it as phytoplankton. As a producers, their role is significant, because the green plants and phytoplankton, they trap the radiant energy. By photosynthesis, they prepare their own food material. What are the other examples for the producers? The chemoautotrophs. The chemoautotrophs prepare their own food material by using the chemical energy instead of radiant energy. Now, as a producers, the role of chemoautotrophs is not significant. The producers utilize some amount of food material for their own activity. The remaining is supplied to consumers. What are the consumers? The primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers. After the death of producers and consumers, their body will be decomposed by decomposers. The decomposers will bring decomposition. In the producers and consumers body, the complex organic materials are present. They are converted into simple inorganic nutrients. Again, the simple inorganic nutrients are utilized by producers. Now here what is the answer? In an ecosystem, the nutrient recycling is largely affected due to the absence of. Without decomposers, the cycling process will be affected. Because in the body of producers and consumers, the complex organic materials are present. After the death of producers and consumers, their body will be decomposed by decomposers. Now we are getting the simple inorganic nutrients. Again, the simple inorganic nutrients utilized by producers. So without decomposers, we are not getting the simple inorganic nutrients. Without simple inorganic nutrients, the producers again do not prepare the food materials. So without decomposers, the nutrient cycle is largely affected. What is the other name of decomposers? They are also called osmotrophs. They are also called the micro consumers. Now, based on this information, what is the correct answer for this question? That is the micro consumers. They are also called osmotrophs. They are also called the decomposers. Now we go for the next question. Third trophic level organisms are. First we have to observe the options. The question is third trophic level. The options: secondary consumers which are primary carnivores, primary consumers which are herbivores, tertiary consumers which are secondary carnivores. The fourth one is climax consumers which are saprotrophs. Here what is the question? The third trophic level. Now in an ecosystem, now this one we call it as the first trophic level, and it is followed by the second trophic level, and this is followed by the third trophic level, and this is followed by the fourth trophic level. In an ecosystem, always the first trophic level is occupied by producers. The second trophic level occupied by primary consumers. The primary consumers are also called the herbivores. And the third trophic level is occupied by the secondary consumers. The secondary consumers are also called the primary carnivores. The fourth trophic level is occupied by tertiary consumers. They are also called the secondary carnivores. Now, as we observe the third trophic level, the third trophic level is occupied by secondary consumers. They are also called the primary carnivores. Now you have to observe. The question is the third trophic level organisms are. This is the third trophic level in which what type of organisms? The secondary consumers. What is the other name of secondary consumers? The primary carnivores. Now based on this information, what is the correct answer for this question? Secondary consumers which are the primary carnivores. Now we go for the next question. Assertion. As per competitive exclusion, again repeating, as per competitive exclusion, the two closely related species competing for same resources cannot coexist indefinitely. That is the assertion. Now what is the reason? If the resources are limited, the competitively inferior one will be eliminated or removed or excluded by dominant one. And now this concept is explained regarding the competitive exclusion. Competitive exclusion. Now regarding the competitive exclusion, now this is one habitat. H means one habitat. This is another habitat. Now in this habitat what is present? The limna. In this habitat what is present? The spirodela. Spirodela. Now the limna and spirodela are present in two different habitats. In their own habitats they are independent. Now these two are kept in same habitat. Now this is one habitat. In this habitat we kept the limna as well as spirodilla. Whenever these two aquatic weeds are kept in the same habitat, this is the superior one and this is the inferior one, or this is the dominant one. Whenever limna and spirodilla, if they are present in their own habitat, no doubt they are independent. Whenever limna and spirodilla are kept in the same habitat, the limna is superior and dominant. Now the limna removes the spirodilla. That means whenever two independent species are kept in the same habitat, the species that is superior removes the inferior one. That we call it as competitive exclusion. Now again repeating the assertion. As per competitive exclusion, the two closely related species here, limna and spirodilla, competing for same resource cannot coexist indefinitely. Now limna and spirodilla are kept in the same habitat. Whenever they are present in the same habitat, they cannot exist indefinitely, because here the spirodilla is inferior one, limna is superior. Whenever one superior and inferior are kept in the same habitat, the superior one eliminates or excludes or removes the inferior one. That we call it as competitive exclusion. Now the reason, if the resources are limited, now in this habitat the resources are limited, then what is going to happen? The competitively inferior, here what is the inferior? Spirodilla, that is eliminated or excluded by the dominant one. Here what is the dominant? The limna. Now based on this information, what is the correct answer? Both are correct, the R explains A. Now we go for the next question. Edge species. Now what are the edge species? What is the edge effect? Now this is one ecosystem and this is another ecosystem. This is ecosystem 1 and this is ecosystem 2. The space between two ecosystems, that we call it as ecotone. Now this is called ecotone. Now in this ecosystem, one example is the grass. Here one example for another ecosystem, that is forest. This is one ecosystem, this is another ecosystem. Between two ecosystem, a transitional zone. Between two ecosystems, a transitional zone is present, that is called ecotone. Now in this ecotone, the ecosystem 1 species are present, as well as in the ecotone, the species of ecosystem 2 are also present. Now in the ecotone, we have to observe the diversity. What is meant by diversity? Variety or differences. Now what is meant by ecotone? It is the transitional zone between two ecosystems. Here what is one ecosystem? Named as grassland. Now another ecosystem named as forest area. In between these two ecosystems, the transitional zone we call it as ecotone. In the ecotone, the species of two different ecosystems are present. So here we have to observe more number of species and more number of varieties. That we call it as diversity. Now in the ecotone, species of two ecosystems are present. That we call it as edge species. Such effect we call it as edge effect. Now edge species occur in between forest and grassland. Now this is one ecosystem, another ecosystem. Now the transitional zone between two biotic communities. This is one community, another community. In between the transitional zone is called ecotone. In this ecotone, the species of both systems are present, edge species. Such effect we call it as edge effect. Third one, that transitional zone we call it as ecotone. Now regarding the edge species, what is the correct answer? Now what are the edge species? They are present in the ecotone. What is meant by ecotone? A transitional zone between the two ecosystems. Here we have taken what type of ecosystems? One is grassland and the second one is forest area. Now here for this question, what is the correct answer? All three statements are correct. Now we go for the next question. Grass plants do not grow in a taiga. We are having an idea what is meant by taiga, a coniferous forest area. Grass plants do not grow in a taiga. In the taiga, what is predominant? The pine trees. Because of, you have to observe. Now this is an area that we call it as taiga. In this area, the coniferous plants are predominant. Here in this area, what is the example that we call it as pine trees or pine vegetation? The place where pine trees are present. Now in this area, the pine trees are predominant. The place where pine trees are present, there the grass plants do not grow because these pine trees will secrete a chemical. Because of this poisonous chemical, in this area, the soil lost fertility. In this area, because of the pine plants, they secrete poisonous chemicals. Because of the chemicals in this area, the soil is polluted. In this polluted area, there is no chance for the growth of another vegetation. Here, grass plants. The place that is taiga. Here, what is the predominant? The pine plants. The pine plants secrete a poisonous chemical. Because of the poisonous chemical, the soil is polluted. In this soil, there is no chance for the growth of grass plants. That we call it as chemical inhibition. Allelopathy. What is meant by allelopathy? That is chemical inhibition. Because of the pine plants, there is no chance for the growth of second vegetation. Now the question is, grass plants do not grow in a taiga with predominant pine vegetation because of, one is competition, second one allelopathy, third one lack of light, the fourth one soil made highly alkaline by pine needles dropping on the ground. Now the correct nearest answer is allelopathy. Now we go for the next question. A succession. What is meant by succession? It is a gradual orderly changes. Again repeating, what is meant by succession? A gradual orderly changes. A succession that begins in a polluted area containing mostly decomposed matter. And now, as we observe the ecological succession, this is one habitat or one area. In this area, the decomposed materials are present. This is decomposed material. Now, in an area, decomposed material is present. If in a area, decomposed or dead and decaying material is present, what type of organisms gradually, orderly going to develop? That is heterotrophs. Again repeating, what is meant by succession? Succession is a gradual, orderly changes. Here it is an area or a habitat. In this, what are predominant? The dead and decaying decomposed material. In a area, if decomposed materials are predominant, what type of succession is going to observe? The heterotrophs gradually, orderly going to develop. That we call it as heterotrophic succession. Now here, a succession that begins in a polluted area containing mostly decomposed matter, that is a secondary succession, an autotrophic succession, a heterotrophic succession, a primary succession. Now based on this information, what is the correct answer is heterotrophic succession. The correct answer for this question is heterotrophic succession. Now we go for the next question. Now the next one is the succession begins on an area. Again repeating, the succession begins on an area or in an area which is not inhabited by any biotic community to establish a climax community. Now the succession begins in an area which is not inhabited by any biotic community to establish a climax community. Now this is an area. In the beginning, in this area, no biotic community, no biotic community, no biotic community, in brackets into. Into mark indicates in this area no biotic community. Now you have to observe the succession begins on or in an area which is not inhabited by any biotic community. Now in this area gradually, orderly, a climax community is going to establish. That we call it as primary succession. The second one, in an area already a community present. In order to establish a climax community, already present community is slowly removed. That we call it as secondary succession. In an area, the inorganic materials present. What type of succession is going to start? Autotrophic. In an area, decomposed material present. What type of succession is going to start? Heterotrophic. Now here, it is an area. In this area, there is no community. In order to establish a climax community, gradual orderly changes are going to occur. That we call it as the primary succession. Now we have to observe the answer for this question is, that is primary succession. The second one, the next question is, Toxochora, a pseudocoelomate, is an amensal on. Now, as we observe the associations, one we call it as mutualism. We know very well. And the second one we call it as the commensalism. And the third one we call it as the parasitism. And the next one we call it as amensalism. Now, in order to explain the amensalism, definitely one is affected and the second one is not affected. Now here, to explain amensalism, what is present? The Toxochora. Now what is meant by Toxochora? It is a nematode parasite. In the nematodes, coelom absent. That means, though the coelom present, it is not covered and protected by mesodermal epithelia. So what type of coelom in the nematoda? Pseudocoelom. So Toxochora come under the phylum Nematoda. In the phylum Nematoda, what type of coelom? The pseudocoelom. Now as we observe the Toxochora, it is a parasite. Now around this body, what is present? A cyst is present. Now this Toxochora enters into the body of, now this one we call it as a rat, come under the order Rodentia. Now the encysted Toxochora enters into the body of the rat, come under the order Rodentia. Now here it is affected. Why it is affected? Because in its body what is present? The Toxochora. In this association, which is unaffected, the Toxophora. Now based on this information, Toxophora, it is a nematode or pseudocoelomate, is an commensal on hermetic crab, rodents. What is the example for the rodentia or rodents? That is the rat. Third one man and the fourth one monkey. Based on this information, the answer is the rodents or the rat or the rodentia. Now we go for the next question. The ecological succession in the habitat where there is extreme deficiency of water is said to be. Now, this is one habitat, and in this habitat, in the beginning, no water. Slowly in this habitat, a moderate water is present. Slowly in this habitat, the more water is present. Now you have to observe this example. It is a classical example for the succession. What is meant by succession? It is a gradual, orderly changes occur in a habitat. Now in this habitat, in the beginning, there is no water. That we call it as xeroseer. Now slowly what changes observed? In this habitat, the moderate amount of water is present. That we call it as the mesosphere. Finally, what type of climax community? In this habitat, more amount of water is present. That we call it as the hydrosphere. Now, based on this information, we have to observe the question. The ecological succession in the habitat where there is extreme deficiency of water. Now this is the habitat. In the beginning there is no water. That we call it as xeroseer. Later in this habitat, moderate amount of water present, mesosphere. Finally it is occupied by more amount of water. That we call it as hydrosphere. Now based on this information, what is the correct option for this question is the xerosphere. Now we go for the next question. The following statements are about grazing food chain. Now we have to discuss the food chains. We know very well the food chains are two types. One we call it as the grazing food chain, and the second one we call it as the detritus food chain. What is meant by grazing food chain? All grazing animals are the herbivores. In the grazing food chain, the animals are arranged one above the other. That is a linear arrangement. In the grazing food chain, as the energy passes from one animal to another animal, slowly the energy decreases. In the grazing food chain, where the energy is stored, it is stored in the tissues of animals as well as stored in the tissues of plants. Now, we have to observe one by one. The following are the statements are about grazing food chain. Now, first option. The grazing animals play an important role in the transfer of energy to the carnivores. Now you have to observe this example. Now this one we call it as the grass. The grass is eaten by a deer. Now it is eaten by a tiger. Now it is eaten by a hawk. Now you have to observe how the energy transfers from the grass to deer, from deer to tiger, then it is transferred to hawk. Whenever these animals are going to die, all these animals' body decomposed by decomposers, then the energy transferred to the decomposers. Now, what is the first statement? Grazing animals play an important role in the transfer of energy to the carnivores. Now, second statement. The grazing food chains are linear. Now you have to observe how the organisms are arranged. They are arranged one above the other. Such arrangement we call it as linear. Now, the grazing food chains are linear and are with minimum 3 tropic levels or 4 or 5 tropic levels. Now you have to observe this one we call it as the phytoplankton. The phytoplankton is eaten by zooplankton. The zooplankton is eaten by small fishes. The small fishes eaten by large fishes. Now you have to observe this food chain. How many trophic levels? 1, 2, 3, 4. Now here in this trophic level, how many are stages? 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this is removed. Now in this trophic level or in this food chain, how many trophic levels are present? 1, 2, 3. Here how many are present? 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it is eaten by a seal. Now in this food chain, how many trophic levels? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It means in a grazing food chain, minimum number of trophic levels 4, the maximum is 5. Third, the grazing food chains are also called predator food chains. How? We know very well predator. One example is for the predator, that is the cat. Now here what is the prey? The rat. This is predator and prey. The predator kills the prey at once. Now as we observe the grazing food chain, take for example tiger. Like a predator, it kills the deer at once. The deer, like a predator, kills the grass at once. Now the seal, like a predator, kills the large fish at once. The large fish, like a predator, kills the small fish at once. The small fish kills the zooplankton like a predator at once. The zooplankton kills the phytoplankton like a predator at once. So that the grazing food chains are compared to that of predator food chains. Now based on this information, all these given statements are correct. Now we go for the next question. Assertion: the food chains are not totally independent. Now you have to observe the food chains. Now this is one food chain. Here as we observe the food chain, the grass is eaten by a deer. The deer is eaten by a tiger. The tiger is eaten by a hawk. Now what is the next example? Phytoplankton eaten by zooplankton, eaten by small fish, eaten by large fish, eaten by a seal. Now it is eaten by a hawk. In the same way, now this is the grass. The grass is eaten by a grasshopper. The grasshopper is eaten by a frog. The frog is eaten by a snake. The snake is eaten by a hawk. Now as we observe these food chains, in this food chain, what is the climax carnivore? Hawk. The same hawk is repeated in the remaining examples. In this food chain, the hawk eaten the tiger. The same hawk in this food chain eaten the seal. The same hawk in this food chain eaten the snake. That means as we observe the food chains, each food chain appears to be independent, but in reality the food chains are not independent. Among the food chains there is an inseparable association in the form of a net, that we call it as food web, because in the ecosystem or in the kingdom Animalia, the animals perform different feeding habitats. Some animals take only solid food materials. Some animals prepare their own food material. Some animals absorb food materials from the dead and decaying organic materials. Some animals eat both plant and animal matter. Based on this information, the food chains appears to be independent, but in reality they are not independent. Among these food chains, an inseparable association in the form of a net, that we call it as a food web. Now based on this information, assertion: the food chains are not totally independent. 100% correct. A reason: some animals feed on organisms of different trophic levels of different food chains. Now in this food chain, the hawk eaten tiger. The same hawk in this food chain eaten the seal. The same hawk eaten the snake in this food chain. Now some animals feed on organisms of different trophic levels of different food chains, thus forming a web of interlinking food chains. Now Both are correct or he explains A. Now the answer is 1. Now we go for the next question. Assertion. Pyramid of biomass. What is meant by biomass? That is dry weight. Now, as we observe our body is made by many cells. Now, in each cell, in the protoplasm, 92% water present. Now, you have to remove 92% water from each cell. Then, we have to take or we have to observe our weight. That we call it as the dry weight. Biomass means the dry weight of an organism. Here we are discussing assertion. Pyramid of biomass in a pond is inverted. Now reason. Biomass of our organisms in the first trophic level is less than that of the next trophic levels. Now as we observe the pyramid of biomass. Now as we observe the ecological pyramids, as trophic level increases, the number decreases. As the number decreases, the biomass decreases. In general, what is the shape of pyramid of biomass? No doubt it is triangular, straight or upright. But here what is the asking? What is the pyramid of biomass in pond ecosystem? That is inverted. Now as we observe the pond ecosystem, now this one we call it as the large fishes. And this one we call it as the small fishes. Now this one we call it as the zooplankton. Now this one we call it as the phytoplankton. Now as we observe the pond ecosystem, in a pond ecosystem, as we observe the phytoplankton number is less than that of the number of zooplankton. So that in the pond ecosystem, the pyramid of biomass is inverted. Because when compared to that of the phytoplankton, here the zooplankton number is more. But as the number of phytoplankton is less, though their number is less, in the phytoplankton the energy is more. Because in the producers the metabolic rate is very, very high. Irrespective of the number, always in the producers the energy is more. In general, what is the shape of pyramid of biomass? Straight or upright or triangular. But in the pond ecosystem, the number of phytoplankton less than that of the number of zooplankton. So that in the pond ecosystem, the pyramid of biomass is inverted. Now, what is the answer? Both are correct or explain CA. Now we go for the next question. Animals which cannot eaten by any other animal. Now, this is the first trophic level. This is second trophic level. This is third trophic level. And this is the fourth trophic level. The first trophic level is occupied by producers. Second trophic level occupied by herbivores. They are also called the primary consumers. And the third trophic level occupied by the primary carnivores. They are also called secondary consumers. And the third trophic level is occupied by secondary consumers. They are called the tertiary consumers. In a food chain, as we observe, the secondary consumer, the tertiary consumer is also called the secondary carnivore. Here one example is the hawk or the vulture. The tertiary consumer or secondary carnivore, it is not eaten by any animal. That is called the climax carnivore. What type of animal can eat the tertiary consumer or secondary carnivore? After the death of tertiary consumer, its body is eaten by the decomposers. So that in a food chain, what type of organism is not eaten by other animal? Tertiary consumer, that is also called the secondary carnivore or climax carnivore. Now, here animals which cannot eaten by any other animal: primary carnivore, secondary consumer, climax carnivore and detrivore. Now here what is the climax carnivore? Tertiary consumer. It is also called the secondary carnivore. Now here What is the correct answer for this question is the third option. Now we go for the next question. Among the following denitrifying bacteria, among the following, what is the denitrifying bacteria? Now as we observe the nitrogen cycle, now this one we call it as the nitrogen. The nitrogen is converted into ammonia. Now the ammonia is converted into nitrate. Then it is converted into nitrate. The plants are unable to take the nitrogen directly. So the nitrogen is converted into nitrate. Then it is taken by the plants. Now in the soil, what are the nitrifying bacteria? Azotobacter. In the Leguminaceae family, in the root nodules, what is the nitrifying bacteria? That is Rhizobium. In water, what is the nitrifying bacteria? That we call it as cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. Now, the ammonia is converted into nitrite by nitrosomonas. The nitrite converted into nitrate by nitrobacter. But here what is the question? Denitrification. The nitrate converts into the nitrogen. That we call it as denitrification. Such denitrification is brought by what type of bacterium? One is Pseudomonas, second Cryptomonas, third Chilomonas, and the fourth one is Nostoc. Now here the denitrification means sometimes the nitrates again converted into nitrogen. That denitrification is brought by what type of bacterium? That is Pseudomonas putida. That also play an important role to control the marine water pollution. Now we go for the next question. As per the pyramid of number in an ecosystem from lower tropic level to higher tropic level, there is, now in an ecosystem, as we observe, this is the first tropic level, and this is second tropic level, and this is third tropic level, and this is the fourth tropic level. As tropic level increases, first tropic level, that is first tropic level occupied by the producers, the second tropic level occupied by herbivores, third tropic level primary consumers, here secondary. This is primary carnivores, secondary carnivores. Now as tropic level increases, the number decreases. Where more numbers are present? In the first tropic level. Where less numbers are present? In the fourth tropic level or fifth tropic level. As tropic level increases, no doubt the number decreases. But the size of animal increases. The size of animal increases. Now here in the fourth tropic level or in the fifth tropic level, the animal body size is large. Now as tropic level increases, the number decreases, the energy decreases, the biomass decreases. But here and there some exceptions are present. In case of parasites, as tropic level increases, the number increases. In case of pond ecosystem, as tropic level increases, the number decreases. Already we discussed the pyramid of biomass. But in reality or generally, as tropic level increases, the number decreases, but the size of animal increases. Here the question, as per the pyramid of number in an ecosystem from the lower tropic level to higher tropic level, there is a progressive decrease. Now you have to observe decrease in the number and size of organisms, increase in number and size of organisms, decrease in number and increase in the size of organisms. Now here what is the correct answer? That is the third option. As the tropic level increases, the number decreases and the size increases. Again we have to repeat. As we observe the pyramids, one is the number pyramid and the second one is the energy pyramid and the third one is biomass pyramid. As the tropic level increases, the number decreases. So that always the number pyramid is straight. As tropic level increases, energy decreases. So energy pyramid is also straight. As tropic level increases, the number decreases, the biomass decreases. So that generally the biomass pyramid is also the straight. But what are the exceptions? In case of parasites, as tropic level increases, the number increases. So in parasites, what is the number pyramid? Inverted. Regarding the pond ecosystem, what is the pyramid of biomass? In the pond ecosystem, phytoplankton number less than that of zooplankton. So in the pond ecosystem, the biomass pyramid is inverted. Now we go for the next question. What is meant by tropic efficiency? Now where we have to observe this. What is meant by tropic efficiency? Energy flow. Now while explaining the energy flow, one we call it as exploitation energy or exploitation efficiency. The second one we call it as assimilation efficiency. And here what is the tropic efficiency? Now as we observe the first tropic level, the first tropic level is occupied by the producers. The producers prepare the grass primary productivity, GPP. In the grass primary productivity, some productivity is utilized for the respiration. So from the GPP, the R is removed. We are getting the NPP. Now in the first tropic level, in the producer's body, what type of productivity is present? Net primary productivity. Now this is the second tropic level. In the second tropic level, what are present? Primary consumers. What is the other name of primary consumers? Herbivores. Now in the second tropic level, the herbivores eaten or taken or ingested what type of productivity? The NPP. Now the herbivore eats NPP. Now in the herbivore body, such NPP is finally converted into net secondary productivity. Now here what is the tropic efficiency? The percentage of grass primary production that is converted into net primary production. Second option, the percentage of net primary production that is converted into grass secondary production. Third, the percentage of grass secondary production that is converted into net secondary production. What is the fourth option? The percentage of net primary production that is converted into net secondary production. Now again you have to observe this diagram. In the first tropic level, what is present? The producer. The producer prepares GPP. From the GPP, what is removed? R. That means respiration. Now we are getting NPP. Now in the body of producers, what is present? NPP. That NPP is eaten by primary consumer or herbivore. In the herbivore body, finally such NPP is converted into what type of productivity? NSP, net secondary productivity. So the NPP is converted into NSP, that is the tropic efficiency of the herbivore. Based on this information, what is the correct option? The fourth one.